Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming along to my talk. I'm pretty stoked to have the privilege to speak at this conference because it's in my hometown and it's on the topic of community. If you've not seen that video clip before, it's from a movie called Three Amigos. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it is very funny in parts. But that bit highlights one piece of wisdom for encouraging communities to work well together. Play to your strengths. I guess you'd have to watch the rest of the movie to find out how that happens. So, a strong and vibrant community is a wonderful thing, and I believe the community that surrounds Ruby is pretty special, obviously. Personally, I've drawn immense value from it, and I've tried to contribute back in turn when I can. I want to make sure that this community that we've collectively built evolves and improves, and so I've been hunting for ideas, for examples from outside of Ruby, outside the programming culture we're so familiar with. Ideas and examples that can perhaps provide a touch of wisdom to us. In particular, I've learnt a lot from the writings of Peter Block and Allan de Botton. But before I get to their insights, I want to share a few stories. I am involved in all three of these, but thankfully I'm just a supporting role in two. The first, though, is all about me, and so I apologize in advance. And it begins several years ago. From a professional perspective, 2005 was not a great year for me at all. I was subcontracted out to a big telecommunications company, I'll let you guess which one, in a soulless office in the eastern suburbs here in Melbourne. The projects weren't particularly interesting, nor was the technology. I mean, the company I actually worked for, was a Microsoft-focused consultancy, and they had an eye on modern approaches, but classic ASP was the tool of choice for our client. Using tables, style attributes, font tags, that was the standard. If I even got to use C# or ASP.NET, hell, even CSS, that was a rare thrill. And then a good friend of mine, James Healy, and I don't know if he's in this, oh, yeah, there he is. He's here. He introduced me to this fancy new framework that brought the fun back into web development. Ruby on Rails. For me, half of the joy came from Ruby itself. Such an expressive and direct language, and without any pesky semicolons. I found myself trying to implement Ruby and Rails-like approaches into my ASP code. I guess it comes as no surprise that I didn't get very far, especially without any magical metaprogramming. So I had to content myself with building sites for side projects with my new love, begrudgingly accepting Microsoft's limitations in my day job. It was never going to last. So I began to rock up to the Melbourne Ruby meetings in the middle of 2006 and quickly became extremely jealous of the people there who were already using Ruby every day and getting paid for it. But at the end of that year, I resigned from my job, became a contractor, and then people started to pay me to code in Ruby. I was pretty stoked. So I immersed myself within the Ruby community. I read books and blog posts, attended more Melbourne Ruby meets, hung out in IRC channels, and then, when Ben Askins announced that very first Rails camp, I had no hesitation in buying a ticket. Is there anyone else in this room who was there that weekend in Somersby? Yeah, there's a few of you around. There's Ben himself. That was an amazing weekend. As part of preparations for the event, there was a wiki page, and anyone who was going could edit that page, add, you know, who they were, where they're coming from, some ideas that they'd like to hear about, maybe some topics that they could present on. Everyone else was putting their details in, so I did the same, and wasn't really expecting to speak, though. I didn't think I really had the courage to. But then I got an email from Tim Lucas. I don't know if Tim's in the room, but he's certainly around. And Tim encouraged, I assume he was sending it to everyone who was signed up, and he's certainly encouraging me to choose one of the topics I'd put down and prepare a talk. Speaking in front of my peers is a little nerve-wracking now for me. Maybe it shows. But back then, oh, so scary, terrifying. But I'd had the email from Tim, I had his encouragement, so I committed to a topic. I put together my ideas on some slides, and much to my surprise and relief, the assembled Rubyists at that camp found it somewhat interesting. They even had a few questions. Encouraged by this, feeling like I belonged in the Ruby community a little more, a few months later, I started my first serious open source project. I'd been looking to implement full text search for a client's application, but none of the existing tools were quite what I was after. I was really looking for something a little smarter, a little more thoughtful, if you like. So I set aside a weekend and I built something, and then I released it to the world. That project, as I'm sure some of you have guessed, was Thinking SPHINX. And I'm still stunned that it's going strong today. It's been 5.5 years. There's been over 100 contributors, including Josh's very valuable work. It's been through a couple of rewrites, but it's still there. It's still being used. I'm still looking after it. So that's me. The next story is something a little more recent. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll very likely know that I work from a co-working space here in Melbourne called Inspire 9. I'm a little noisy on that topic. Anyone who's been to a Ruby meet in Melbourne in the last 12 months or so will know the space. And everyone else is very much welcome to drop by. We have an open desk policy. If you're in Melbourne, you need a desk, you just want to relax, please do come visit. We've got a pool table, we've got a table tennis table, we've got some amazing bean bags, and we've got pretty good Wi-Fi as well. Now, not only do we have the Ruby meets there, we have many other events. And just under a year ago, we had one that was quite large, probably about 100 people or so. During the course of that event, our events manager at the time, Keely Nutt, who isn't here unfortunately, she had her iPhone stolen off her desk while she was running around sorting out the event, making sure everything was going smoothly. Now, of course, she was quite upset about this, and so were many of the residents there. As the dust settled after it had all happened, one of our regulars, Ned Dwyer, decided to make sure that Keely got a replacement iPhone. Ned set up a donation page on Pledgy and quietly shot around an email to many of us, not to Keely though. Within a couple of hours we had the money. By the end of the day, Keely had her new iPhone. She was a little shocked, but thrilled. Yes, this is a heartwarming story, but that's not why I'm recounting it for you now. See, not only had Keely lost her iPhone, and this may sound a little cliche perhaps, but we'd all felt like we'd lost something too. There's an amazing sense of deep trust at Inspire 9, but that trust had been violated. Ned made it clear when he sent out that email that he was doing this to restore the balance. Okay, something a bit lighter. Hands up who likes pancakes. Yeah. I thought there might be a few of you. I am a big fan of pancakes, and I have a habit of cooking them for my friends quite regularly. A habit I've picked up from my family. See, every year on Pancake Tuesday, which was just last week, if you weren't aware, they invite dozens of friends around and they cook up a fantastic and tasty and very flat feast. The reason for this ritual is something that happened about 25 years ago. My parents had recently connected with the parish of St. Joseph's in Northcote, here in Melbourne, and they'd made many friends quite quickly, and so they were looking to buy a house in the area. Houses in Northcote are not cheap at all right now, but even back then, in the 80s, a modestly sized house was outside of my parents' budget. When their new friends in the parish learnt of this situation, they pooled their own resources and provided my mum and dad with enough money to cover a deposit. None of them had massive pools of cash of their own, but this was not a loan, it was a gift. To acknowledge the generous support, my parents brought their friends together for pancakes, and that quickly became a tradition. It's been going, indeed, 25 years or so now. We've only had 1 year off, and that was because we were renovating. And so many of those same friends come back every year, and they've been close family friends. So those are 3 stories from 3 different communities. But there's some common threads, though, and they highlight some wisdom of what I think are 3 key elements of healthy communities. The first of those is participation. Now, we Rubyists, we're pretty good at this one. I mean, there's no end of events to share knowledge and skills at, to learn from others, sometimes like through presentations at conferences like this, sometimes via communal coding, sometimes just from hanging out together. And we do plenty of that. And then there's the open source movement and the countless gems and scripts that we share and document, log issues and contribute to, build upon and extend from. Don't repeat yourself is one of our favorite mantras, and well, standing on the shoulders of our open source peers is dry on a macro scale. Now, these aren't inherently Ruby ideals, of course. We are just following trends and wisdom common within our corner of the technology industry. But this doesn't mean that we can give ourselves a pass for this item on my checklist, because it's not enough just to participate. How we go about it is equally important. To some extent, the how can be managed by the tools we use. And GitHub in particular has certainly done wonders for assisting contributions to open source projects. And we can have conversations based on a pull request or a commit or even a line of code. Of course, it's always better if we keep those conversations friendly and civil. And we could do far worse than adhering to one of our own mantras, mince one. Or rather, Mats is nice, so we are nice. Excuse me. But for face-to-face interactions, well, the technology community, and especially the Ruby community, has gained a fair reputation for almost constant socializing, often over a few drinks. In fact, probably almost always over a few drinks. I'm sure there'll be some tonight. I actually think this is a big part of the success of Ruby. When I was reading the philosopher Allan de Botton's book, Religion for Atheists, he is quite clear in noting that both Christianity and Judaism, particularly in their early days, built a lot of their rituals around meals. And the value of this for them and for us is that it provides an excellent opportunity for the members of the community to both share ideas and to meet new members and to build those connections. Many Ruby meets around the world are well practiced at this. Certainly the Melbourne one is. But I'm a little surprised that not all are. I've attended meetings where people spend most of their time on their laptops, hunched over, coding away. And look, I'm not saying this is entirely bad. They probably get a lot of great code written. But if you rock up like I did, where you don't know anyone, then I find it a little antisocial and a little unwelcoming. I know other cities have their focus on the sessions, but sometimes provide no avenues for socializing over a meal or a drink, which really feels like a lost opportunity to me. This is a quote from Twitter. I haven't bothered to mention the city, that's not the point. But I just want to reinforce that I'm not the only one who thinks it maybe could be improved. And one more thing that prompts people to participate is inviting them to take part in some way. Had Tim not reached out and asked me to prepare a talk for that very first Rails camp, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have done anything. His encouragement helped me to get more value out of that event. I guess that brings me to the second element of my Healthy Communities checklist: leadership. See, Tim was doing what every good leader should do. He was, and these aren't my words, but he was creating a context of hospitality and collective possibility. Sounds a little wanky, I guess, but I think it fits. Tim wasn't in charge, he was just keen to ensure that everyone made the most of that Rails camp. The fact that he stepped up, even though he wasn't in control of the event, is especially excellent. Because from what I've been reading, it's made quite clear that we should be a little wary of centering a community on official leaders. Such a focus is unhealthy, because we can end up placing all responsibility and blame, when it suits, on these leaders, which is fantastic if we want to complain, but then we're absolving ourselves from having any role in shaping the community. You keep following this path, and you'll very likely end up with a culture of dependency and entitlement. Now, don't get me wrong. Organisations like Ruby Australia, who've made this event happen, and Ruby Central, who make many other events happen, they're valuable, they do excellent work, but they're not in charge of how our community runs, and nor are they trying to be. We all need to hold ourselves accountable for the well-being of our community and choose to own and exercise power rather than defer and delegate it to others. Ned's actions back at Inspire 9 to restore the balance reflects his sentiment precisely. He's a resident of co-working space, but he did not wait for any official Inspire 9 team member to act. And the same goes for the families who supported my parents. This wasn't something done by the parish priest, nor any other official there. It was just people within the community seeing that something could change and standing up and making that happen. For those of us who end up in slightly more formal roles of leadership, whether that's running a conference like this, or a Rails camp, or a meetup, or a hack session, or whatever, I've found two great recommendations from Peter Block on what you can focus on. Now, these are his words, not mine, but let's go with that. As a leader, you need to shift the context in which people gather. In other words, provide the best environment possible for everyone who's gathered, a place that's welcoming and encouraging. His other point is to listen rather than advocate, defend, or provide answers. Because you're not there to control things. You're there to facilitate. You're there to help others get the most out of these gatherings. The goal is to provide a place where people feel like they're welcome and valued. In short, somewhere where they belong. Which coincidentally, because I didn't plan this at all, is the third element of my Healthy Communities checklist, a sense of belonging. Because that's really the point of it all, right? You're not going to bother with any time on a community that you don't feel you belong to. Without that sense of belonging, participation and leadership, that just don't come into it. This value is discussed by Robert Putnam in his book Bowling Alone, and he's written other things as well, all really on this kind of topic. A community's well-being simply has to do with the quality of the relationships, the cohesion that exists amongst its citizens. Or look, if you want to wrap it up in a buzzword, social capital. See, the stronger the social capital is, the stronger the community. And there's also the added benefit that it increases our perception of self-worth. And I don't think that's a bad thing either. Again, the best way to do this is to focus on hospitality. Make sure that people know that everyone is equal and that they're very welcome to be there. I'm sure many of you know Nathan from Inspire 9. Nathan is exceptionally good at this. A stranger can walk in and he'll wander over and he'll end up chatting to them like they're a long-forgotten friend and just make them feel at ease. And to be honest, I'm a little jealous at how good he is at that. So focus on the things that provide a depth of connection between people. We shouldn't be afraid to keep events smaller than they could be. Generally, the smaller an event is, the stronger the connections are. I've certainly found this true comparing even the Rails camps that happen today with 150 people against the massive conferences like RailsConf where you'll get a few thousand. Definitely more value at a Rails camp. Robert Putnam makes it clear that there are two types of social capital. There's bonding and there's bridging. Bonding social capital is provided through, his phrasing is inward-looking connections composed of like minds. Essentially a whole lot of people thinking roughly the same thing and looking inwards to the community. Whereas the bridging variety is made up of wide mixes of people and generally looking more outward. And with this distinction between the two types comes perhaps a heavy-worded caution. A society that has only bonding social capital will be segregated into mutually hostile camps. So a pluralistic democracy requires lots of bridging social capital, not just the bonding variety. I guess that's maybe a little broader and heavier for what we're going for, but here's an example a little more close to home that could help. A few weeks ago, Sir Tim Berners-Lee was traipsing around Australia, giving a few talks, and when he spoke here in Melbourne, so he was asked a question of what he would change for how he structured the web if he was to do it again today. And so he was talking about his choices with HTTP and URIs and HTML and how they were all designed, and admitted that they weren't quite as elegant as he would have liked. But he doesn't regret his decisions because he chose to base them on existing technologies at the time. His reason for doing this was so other communities could quickly get up and running on the web, and they'd be more encouraged to give it a shot. And I think that worked out pretty well, really. So that's the theory. And now we need to put it into practice. But what does that look like? Firstly, let's try a little less complaining, a little more action, with apologies to the king. We're all in this together, so if you think that something could be improved, try to be a part of fixing that, even if that's just starting the conversation. In a nice manner, of course. We had a recent RubyGems vulnerability just a few weeks ago, and there were plenty of people making snide remarks on Twitter, but there was also many Rubyists, and I'm sure a few people in this room, who stepped up and helped to get everything running again. They validated gem files, they improved security, they were moving things around, and it was all volunteer work. But then everything on rubygems.org is volunteer work. I would say that the things that they were doing far more valuable than, say, complaining on Hacker News, but that's a pretty low bar, really. I found a quote from Peter Block that kind of tied into this. He writes that a story in an unhealthy community is defined, it defines the role of the media as the framer of the debate. But in a healthy community, or when you're trying to build a community, we need to realize that what the media reports is just a reflection. It's not the cause of conversation that citizens are currently holding. I think maybe it could be said that Twitter and Hacker News are the equivalent of our mainstream media within the tech community. So perhaps that's worth keeping in mind next time you're refreshing one of those pages. And of course that flows both ways, right? If we took the words of trolls and techno-fundamentalists to heart, then we'd probably be convinced that there's no value in PHP or Java or C# or JavaScript or even Ruby. And we know that's not true, right? We know developers can make fantastic sites and fantastic tools with any language. So let's make sure our behavior reflects that. Increase that bridging social capital. MinSwan shouldn't just apply between Rubyists. Of course, there's always room for improving our bonding social capital as well. In fact, we can do that right now. So please, just take a moment to introduce yourself to the people around you, especially somebody you don't already know. All right, guys. I'm not done yet. Sorry to interrupt. But you can... Wow, okay, well that got everyone's attention. You can get back to your conversations shortly. I'm not too far from finished. Thanks for your effort with doing that. I know developers can often be introverts, but that little bit of effort in welcoming others makes such a difference. So the next time you're at a tech meet, or whether it's Ruby or something else, or geez, it doesn't even have to be tech, and you spot someone who's looking a little lost, maybe sitting by themselves, just wander up and say hello. If for some reason you need somebody's permission to do that, well, you've got mine. So don't forget to encourage others to share their knowledge and ideas, much like Tim did for me back at that very first Rails camp. Or even better, assist people with taking the next step. Maybe review their code or look over their talks, or maybe help them with a talk proposal for a conference. If you're working with a team, and I know many of you are because a lot of you seem to be wearing the same shirts, then you've got a perfect opportunity to help the others in your team, right? Particularly those who are a little more green, maybe a little less settled. You can help them by doing these things, by reviewing their stuff, by working with them, maybe pairing with them on a presentation. It doesn't just have to be within the company, it can be something broader as well. And if you're still searching for examples of ways to do this, Tiffany Conroy in Berlin started a site called We Are All Awesome. It was done primarily to encourage more women speakers at conferences, and she's done a sterling job of it. She's one of the organisers of JSConf EU, and the site provides plenty of ideas and support to those who haven't done much public speaking at all, so I'd say it's valuable to pretty much everyone. But at the end of the day, perhaps all we need to do is live by the wisdom of Bill S. Preston, Esquire, and Ted Theodore Logan. Be excellent to each other. To which the only correct response is, party on, dude. Thanks for listening.